alayhi salatu wasalam. And these sessions, next 2 or 3, will be focused on the time where the Prophet ﷺ was going through persecution. And it wasn't just him, it was the Sahaba. But I'm going to tell the stories in clumps. I'm going to talk about the persecution that he went through ﷺ personally, and then I'll move on to the Sahaba. So this is not sequential necessarily, but it's all happened within the same span of 6 to 7 years, from year basically 3 until roughly the time he left Mecca ﷺ. We have a little bit better information in terms of sequence of events after year 10, a little bit, but still, when it comes to the persecution, because it was ongoing, sometimes when the stories are told, they don't tell us exactly when this happened. Was it before the Hajj of year 10? Was it before Hisar al-Shi'b? Was it before? When exactly did it occur? So we don't know. We just know that all these forms of persecution happened. So it's hard for me to break it down. So if you're listening to the story from someone else at some point, and there's a difference in sequence in terms of some of these events or encounters that I'm narrating for you, just understand that we don't really know for sure what the day or the hour that it happened. We just know that this happened within this phase of his life, alayhi salatu wasalam, which is, in my opinion, more than enough. It's really all you need to know. There's no value in knowing the detailed dates, really, or timings. So what I talked about last time is I went through a number of stories regarding the persecution and the oppression the Prophet ﷺ endured on a personal level. I talked a little bit about the character assassination, going after his reputation, going after his family, verbally assaulting him ﷺ and mocking him, and I talked a little bit about physical abuse. But today we're going to go into that with a little bit more detail. I'll tell you the story, or the stories, of Uqba ibn Abi Mu'ayt, or Ma'it. And Uqba was by far, as most scholars of Seerah are concerned, the individual who probably mistreated the Prophet ﷺ the most during his time in Mecca. He outdid Abu Lahab and Abu Jahl combined. He was extremely aggressive, he was extremely disrespectful. And the stories are many, and I'll just narrate maybe a couple of them for you so you understand the degree that we're talking about here. Where the Prophet ﷺ would be praying in front of the Kaaba, and Uqba would come, and the ghutra, the hatta that the Arab put on their heads, it was a part of culture back then as well. Not everyone used it, but it was still something some of them would use. If not made into a imama, sometimes they put it on top of an imama or under it. So he took his and he made it a little bit. He thickened it up and he put it around the Prophet ﷺ's neck. He came from behind and he twisted it. And he held it that way until the Prophet ﷺ couldn't stand and he fell to his knees. He couldn't breathe anymore. And until one of the Sahaba or one of the people who saw this happening came and removed. But he refused ﷺ to engage in a brawl with him or in a fight. But he basically brought the Prophet ﷺ to his knees. Another incident, he was praying ﷺ in front of the Kaaba and he was making sujood. And Uqba had slaughtered a camel during the day. So he brought, as the narrations tells us, جاء بسلا جزور, and the sala is basically the intestines of an animal. Now it is used for food back home if you know how to cook it correctly. It's actually pretty good, but it's also extremely filthy at the beginning of after you slaughter an animal. It's filled with filth. So he brought it all, he carried it, and the Prophet ﷺ, when he makes sujood, he put it right on his head. And now the Prophet ﷺ couldn't move. Because if he comes up, it's going to break, and then he'll be covered with basically the fillings of the intestines of an animal, which you can imagine what it is. So he stayed like that. He stayed in sujood until Sayyidah Zainab or Sayyidah Fatima radiallahu anhuma came to the Prophet ﷺ, and they removed it from off him. And one of the narrations that we have is that his daughter would remove the filth off his head alayhi salatu wasalam. It should be sobbing. He's very upset because these actions are extremely dignifying. They're very disrespectful. Someone like the Prophet ﷺ who lived all his life, he never mistreated a soul, never put himself in a position where he subjected himself to being mistreated or called a name or something. Sometimes some people are aggressive and they'll speak in a way that will invite someone to speak to them in a bad way too. So they have thicker skin when it comes to that type of behavior. Alayhi salatu wasalam is an extremely polite human being. He never spoke to people in a way that provoked or allowed them to speak to him in a way that was disrespectful ever. So when it happened to him, alayhi salatu wasalam, we know for a fact that this was the most painful aspect of the oppression. It wasn't really the physical or the financial it was just the dignity piece, his integrity, his reputation, who he was as a person, being subjected to this type of savagery and brutality and just lowness in terms of behaviors. So she was crying because she could see the Prophet ﷺ was very in pain. فقال لا تبكي فإن الله ناصر أباك ولو بعد حين. Don't cry. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant your father success even if it takes time. Even that was his optimism, alayhi salatu. That was his confidence. That inshallah this will work out eventually. Even if it doesn't work out immediately right now when you see me to be weak and being mistreated by these people, but it's all right. Uqba would commonly, when the Prophet ﷺ is speaking to people, fill his hand with dirt or soil and come and throw it in the Prophet ﷺ's face multiple times. This is a reoccurring event that Uqba would do. So he was extremely brutal and very disrespectful to the Prophet ﷺ. He never, ﷺ never responded disrespectfully ever. And don't feel bad about these stories, or don't feel too bad. Because if you love him, ﷺ, and this is something that bothers you, you have the opportunity to stand by him, even though you didn't live at that moment and you couldn't go in and intervene yourself. Because it's just an issue of carrying the legacy or continuing the legacy that he brought. That's what he's interested in. That's what he considers, alayhi salatu wasalam, to be defense and to be spreading of the message and to be standing by him. That's what he considers. He considers your continuing of his legacy, alayhi salatu wasalam, and following of his sunnah and teaching of the message that he brought. Now, interestingly enough, the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam was able to win Uqba over. And this part of the story, I always like to take a moment and just point out before I tell you the rest of it, because the rest of it isn't as great. But this initial piece I thought is always interesting. He was able to win this man over. This man who was physically abusing him and doing disgusting things to try and silence him and to humiliate him in front of people. His patience, alayhi salatu wasalam, his ongoing perseverance and kindness, and his ignoring of these low behaviors, and he keeps on coming back trying to offer him Islam, he won him over. And Uqba started to listen. Uqba started to listen in depth and started to attend sessions with the Prophet ﷺ, actually contemplating, to the point where the people in Mecca started to say, Saba'a Uqba. Uqba has left his faith. He hadn't yet, but he was coming very close to doing that. And then Uqba's best friend came back from travel. He was on a journey. And it would be better if he didn't come back from the journey, but he did. And his best friend, his very close friend, was a man by the name of Abu Hakam ibn Hisham, Abu Jahl. So Abu Hakam ibn Hisham would come from a long journey, a couple of weeks he was away. And before he was able to actually go into his house and have a shower and get some food, and people were knocking on his door. So he came to the door and they told him, Ilhaq sahibak, go see if you can salvage your friend. You may not make it. You may not be able to save him. Like, it's over. قال ما به. What's happening? Is he sick? فقال لا. صبأ مع محمد. He's leaving his faith and he's with Muhammad. Abu Jahl got very upset. So we'd go immediately to the house of Uqba bin Abi Mu'ayt. He'd knock on his door. And Uqba would come out and Abu Jahl would say one thing. He would say, وجهي من وجهك حرام. وكلامي من كلامك حرام. حتى تذهب فتبصق في وجه محمد. I will not speak to you. I will never look at you again. We are no longer friends. I don't know who you are until you go and you spit in Muhammad's face. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So Uqba now is stuck between his best friend and something that he's starting to see the light in. Yeah, he didn't make the right choice. He didn't make the right choice. ويوم يعض الظالم على يديه يقول يا ليتني اتخذت مع الرسول سبيلا يا ويلتى ليتني لم أتخذ فلانا خليلا لقد أضلني عن الذكر بعد إذ جاءني وكان الشيطان للإنسان خذولا وكذلك جعلنا لكل نبي عدوا من المجرمين وكفى بربك هاديا ونصيرا. These verses were revealed after this incident. You understand what I mean. He made the wrong choice. Without going into details of what he had to endure, sallallahu alayhi wa out of respect for him. But that's what happened. Uqba didn't make the right choice. He went to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, but he didn't sit down and listen. He did the latter. He did the other choice. And these verses were revealed. And the day, the day will come where the oppressor will bite down on his hand, on his knuckles, in regret and remorse. This is, I found out, because I had to look into this a little bit, that it's not just an Arab culture thing, it's actually a little bit more widespread as an act of remorse, where they say biting down on your knuckles or biting down on your fingers. It's as if someone is so upset from themselves for making a poor choice that they have the only way they can get out their anger is they harm themselves. Like they bite down on their own knuckles just to harm themselves. It's not a good thing. Never do it. But I'm just saying that it's an expression of someone being in a position of such remorse and regret of the poor choices that they made in their lives, looking at it and saying, why would I ever do that? What was I thinking? How could I have made this? How is it that my judgment, how could my judgment been so bad? Right? We all go through moments like that. Like if you look back at if you're able to contemplate a little bit about your life in terms of your past and your maybe early teenage years and maybe early 20s as well. And even beyond that, honestly, it's not that uncommon. You'll look back at moments and just wonder, what was I thinking? Where was my brain? Was I not, what was I doing? How could I even contemplate doing something like this? So this is what the ayah is saying. يَوْمَ يَعَضُّ الظَّالِمُ عَلَى يَدَيْهِ. He bites down on his knuckles. يَقُولُ, he's saying, يَا لَيْتَنِي اتَّخَذْتُ مَعَ الرَّسُولِ سَبِيلًا. I wish I took that sabil, that path that opened for me with the Prophet. See, a path had opened for him. He didn't feel towards the Prophet ﷺ the way he felt at the beginning. He started to see the light. It made sense to him. He had a path. He had an opening. He had an opportunity. He could have picked it up. He would have been able to. We could have said radiyallahu anhu at the end of his name. Like I could have told you different stories about him. We could have celebrated his legacy. His children would have been proud of of the choices he made, but he didn't. Yeah, but he doesn't end there. This is why I'm telling you this verse, because it doesn't stop there. His narrative goes on. Ya waylata. I mean, what bad news this is for me. Laytani lam attakhidh fulanan khalila. I wish I didn't take fulan, meaning a specific person. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not want to dignify Abu Jahl by putting his name in the Quran. So he said fulanan khalila as my best friend. Whether you are 7 or 70, your friends will define you. Whether you are 7 or 70, makes no difference at all. Who you surround yourself with will dictate a lot about your life, whether you like it or not, whether you believe me or not. You can take this with face value. Read these verses, just take it. The Prophet ﷺ would tell us, يعني المرء على دين خليله فلينظر أحدكم من يخالل. The human being will follow the path, live the lifestyle, will take the religion of his best friend. So may each and every one of you take a good, long, hard look at the people that they choose to make their best friends. يُحْشَرُ الْمَرْءُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ مَعَ مَنْ أَحَبَّ. The person يوم al-qiyamah is going to be brought on the day of judgment with the people whom they loved most. And love is not just an emotion, love is also an action. There's more to it than just a feeling. So people whom you spent the most time with, those who influenced you the most, those who you looked up to, those who you inherited their characteristics and their traits. And there's no way around this. In every culture across the world, this is something that is talked about. With religion, without religion, makes no difference. Like this is something that is a piece of human wisdom that obviously the Prophet ﷺ taught us well. Because why he called the people who followed him, they weren't called al-atba', right? If you think about this, I'm not sure if you ever thought about this. The people who lived with him ﷺ and followed him, right, to the beat, they weren't called al-atba'. Al-muttabi'un, the people who followed, they were called al-ashab, al-sahaba, the friends, the companions. Because the concept of companionship in Islam is extremely powerful and very important. That's why they were called that, sahaba. Because the concept of companionship, of friendship. If you don't, I tell people, like, don't be picky about the wrong things. Don't be picky about the wrong things. Don't be picky about possessions, issues of materialistic things, and your car or your house or don't be picky about this stuff, because it doesn't matter. No one cares. No one's going to remember you by these things, and whatever joy you get out of this will be soon forgotten, and it'll just go. Be picky about who you spend your time with. That's what you be picky about. Be picky who you're going to open your up to, who you're going to allow into your life, because the people you allow into your life will influence you, and you'll influence them 110%. There's no exception to this rule at all. It's impossible that you spend time with someone and they don't affect you or influence your behavior. It's not possible. You spend time with someone, you spend enough time, they will rub off on you and you on them, and that's just the reality of life. So if you don't choose your friends wisely, you spend time with the wrong group, there's nothing I can do for you. And when I say 90% of my counseling time, which I hate doing, by the way, it's not what I do, but 90% of counseling, it could be fixed with just better friends. Like with just better friends for 90% of the problems that come to me. Just choose better people to hang out with, ya Sheikh, and then you'll be better. You won't have to ask me any of these questions. Just you're hanging out with the wrong crew. You didn't choose the people around you wisely. This is a skill. Wallahi, yabni, learn. This is a skill. Learn to learn this skill. What I'm asking you or telling you to do is not to burn bridges with individuals. What I'm asking you to do is learn how to take steps away and steps towards. Figuratively speaking, learn how to move away and move towards people in your life. Fulan, when I'm with this person, I don't know what it is. We just, whenever we're together, we walk away and we've done bad things. We've said bad things. We've come up with bad ideas. Not take a step away. Don't make them your arch enemy. That's not what I'm suggesting here. But take a step away. Be less available. Be less available. Spend less time in a courteous manner. People take a hint after a while. And then look for people who will bring you closer to Allah and take a step towards them. They may not always be the coolest, by the way, or the wealthiest, or but you have to figure out what your priorities are. And I say this, and I used to talk only, like when I did this bit within the Seerah, I always would just focus on the younger people. But wallahi, it doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter. 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, it doesn't matter how old you are. This law, subhanAllah, applies to everyone. So figure it out. And if you are lucky enough, if you are fortunate enough, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses you heavily enough with someone pious and loving in your life, someone who's good, who brings you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a true friend, you hold on to this person. You hold on to them with all your might, because they're very rare and they're spread out. It's not easy. It's sporadic. It doesn't happen. So if you run into a group that is pious, that is good, that they remind you of good things, they encourage you, they empower you, they listen to you, they strengthen you, they support you, and they remind you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you better not let go of that. You don't understand the value of that. Wallahi, when it comes to moving, you should consider that as a factor. People don't think of it. What do they say in Arabic? In Arabic, a proverb. Al-jar qabla ad-dar, right? Your neighbor before your house. You go, look, who's going to be living beside you? Who are you going to see every day? Who's the person you're going to wake up every morning and salams to? That's way more important. There's a funny story here, where a man was selling his house. He was living right next to Abu Hanifa an-Nu'man ibn Thabit, radiyallahu anhu, Imam al-A'zam. So he's living right beside him. So he's selling his house. So the guy, a wealthy gentleman, came and said, "Yes, I'll buy the house. We'll bring someone to assess and what do they call it? Give it a value, whatever that's called." So they came and did it. The guy was given a value. It was around 10,000 dirham. So the man said, I sell the house. I listened to the estimate, and I'm going to sell it for 40,000 dirham. So the man said, no, it was estimated at 10. He said, yeah, 10 is for the house, and 30,000 is for the jiwar of Abu Hanifa al-Nu'man. It's for being the neighbor of Abu Hanifa. You get to be the neighbor of this guy. The value of this house is way higher just based on the fact that this guy's your neighbor. I've lived by him for years, and you buy being a neighbor to this person, radiyallahu anhu, because of the ethics and because of the value of that. It wasn't about fame, by the way, at all. He continues. The Quran continues talking about this. لَقَدْ أَضَلَّنِي عَنِ الذِّكْرِ بَعْدَ إِذْ جَاءَنِي. Indeed, my friend has led me astray from the remembrance of Allah. بَعْدَ إِذْ جَاءَنِي. But after it fell right into my lap. He said, how he led me away from something that came to me, and it was right there. I just had to pick it up. He led me astray. وَكَانَ الشَّيْطَانُ لِلْإِنسَانِ خَذُولًا. And the shaitan is always disappointed and let the human being down. Shaitan al-ins and shaitan al-jinn. Both shayateen. Both. Doesn't matter. Shaitan al-jinn, way less difficult to deal with. A quick a'udhu billahi min ash-shaytan al-rajim, and a little bit he's gone. But shaitan al-ins doesn't go away. Try it. When a shaitan ins comes and a shaitan from the human being comes and tries to get you to do something wrong, say a'udhu billahi min ash-shaytan al-rajim. See if they leave. They don't leave. They stand there and keep on saying, no, you should do it. No, come on, let's go. No big deal. Nothing's going to happen. What's going to happen? You never have fun. Just have fun. And then you do something that you would never do. You would never do. Learn from the story of Uqba, because these verses in the Quran were revealed right after. Choose your friends wisely. Be picky about the right stuff, not about the wrong stuff. What are the things that don't matter? Be picky about this. But who you get to spend your time with. If you're young, it's a big deal. You're going to go through a lot of set of friends if you're young. It's okay, get used to it. If you're 10 or 15 or even 20 years old and you're surrounded by a group of people, it's very rare that by the time you're my age, you're still going to have them as friends. Very, very rare. If you do, then you must have really put a lot of effort to hold on to them for a good reason. Maybe the reason that I gave you, of them being of a certain degree of piety and good character. Otherwise, life just keeps on moving people around. So people come into your life and leave your life all the time. So just be picky and be selective and choose the people who will allow you to be closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who you can strengthen and will strengthen you back. Not the opposite, because Uqba Abi Mu'ayt, because of a poor choice of friendship, went from being a candidate of an early radiyallahu anhu to one of the worst of the worst of the worst. It's a name that when it comes up, it's a bad name to. Whenever you hear the name, you just think of the bad stuff. Just think of all the negativity that he brought into the story of the Prophet ﷺ's life. All right. In the midst of all of this, of what the Prophet ﷺ is going through, I have to point out this surah, because this is when this surah was revealed. I want you to imagine all that I've told you about what's happening to him ﷺ, as he's trying to convey this message of ongoing persecution and oppression and mistreatment and disrespect, where he's being abused physically and verbally and socially and financially. He's losing his reputation. People are talking about him in ways things he's never done. And he's enduring all of this pain, alayhi salatu wasalam. In the midst of all this, Surah Abasa is revealed. And I have to point this out to you, because it's jaw-dropping in my opinion if you understand exactly what the context of this story is. He's standing there, alayhi salatu wasalam, and he's speaking. I'm going to give you the background to understand what Surah Abasa is doing. He's standing there and he's speaking to some of the leaders of Quraysh. He's having a very intense and meaningful discussion. Like the debate is quite, it's peaking. He's making points. People are listening. He's making progress, alayhi salatu wasalam, with the people whom he's able to sway or guide a couple of them towards Islam, then suddenly the whole story of his time in Mecca will change. You see, if Abu Sufyan and Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira and Utbah ibn Rabi'a and Shayba ibn Rabi'a, these people accepted Islam, this story would have been a different story to tell. But they didn't, so the Prophet ﷺ had to leave and go somewhere else. Now obviously there's a wisdom in that, but he's trying to get the leaders to listen to him. So it was very hard to talk to people who don't want to listen to you. Now, this is an easy halaqah to give, because you want to hear about him ﷺ. You want to hear the stories, you're enjoying it. You're not debating everything I tell you, you're not objecting to everything I say. It's hard, it's very difficult, it's very tiring for a public speaker to speak to a group where they don't agree with anything he's saying and they think everything that they're saying is wrong. It's very hard. I've been in those positions before. It's exhausting mentally and intellectually. It's exhausting. But he would go for it, alayhi salatu. He would choose the more difficult job, always. When it came to the effort he was putting in, he wouldn't go for the easier aspects. He wouldn't go and speak. He wouldn't preach to his choir, alayhi salatu wasalam, only. No, he would go out and he would speak to the people who were going to say no. Because if he can get them, he's doing the more noble, the more difficult task. He's doing that. And Abdullah ibn Maktum, who's a blind gentleman who accepted Islam early on, is coming from afar. Now Abdullah ibn Maktum can't see. So he just knows, because someone told him, that the Prophet ﷺ said somewhere over there. But he doesn't know exactly where. So he starts calling, and Ya Rasulullah, Ya Rasulullah, Alimni Ya Rasulullah. Oh Prophet of Allah, I have a question I want you to teach me. Ya Rasulullah. So the Prophet ﷺ is standing there. He looks back. he realizes that now he has to go and speak to him, because the etiquette of prophecy is that if someone comes to you asking for knowledge, you have to offer it to them and leave whatever else you're doing. Whatever else you're doing, you have to leave it. He has to, alayhi salatu wasalam. So he looked back and he knew that immediately he was going to have to go to Abdullah ibn Maktoum and stop this very intense discussion or debate where he feels he's making progress. So he went like this. And he ended it. And he told them, I have to leave. That's it. He just looked at it. He just looked and understood what he had to do. And I can't continue. Even though this is much more difficult. This is much more easier. He wants to learn. He goes to him. He'll tell him. He'll say, Hadir ya Rasulullah. Amrak ya Rasulullah. Ala rasi ya Rasulullah. Whatever you want, I do. It's easier. It's way easier to talk to someone who doesn't talk back. Forgive me. It's a silly. But in general, it's just an easier thing to do. To preach to someone who's listening. It's easier. But for a moment there, he frowned. He has to leave. So he apologized to the people, and he goes to Abdullah ibn Maktoum. He answers his questions, he goes home. He goes home, and Jibreel comes with the Quran, as usual. So I want you to imagine him, alayhi salatu wasalam, sitting there waiting for Jibreel to recite the Quran upon him. He's been outside the house from the morning. People have thrown dirt in his face, have called him names, have ruined his reputation. Some of them push him around. He goes to the leaders, he speaks to them, they argue back in the worst way possible. He tries his best. And then he ends the day by speaking to Abdullah ibn Maktoum, answering questions to someone. And then he goes home. And he sits in front of Jibreel, and Jibreel comes and says, Yallah, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. The Prophet ﷺ is ready to recite after him. عبس وتولى أن جاءه الأعمى وما يدريك لعله يزكى أو يذكر فتنفعه الذكرى أما من استغنى فأنت له تصدى وما عليك ألا يزكى وأما من جاءك يسعى وهو يخشى فأنت عنه تلهى كلا. And he's sitting there, alayhi salatu wasalam. Quran? I mean, you could have just told me. Just tell me I shouldn't. Just tell me that What did he do, really? Like, I spent a while. What exactly did he do? Like, what was the problem? He frowned. Yeah, but he's blind. He can't see. A frown only harms the person who can see it. Like, if you came to me and I frown at you, it'll harm you because you can see me frowning. But if you can't see me, Abdullah ibn Maktoum didn't know the Prophet ﷺ frowned. He found out when the Prophet read Abasa and Isha that night. He had no idea. How would he know? He didn't see him. And he didn't do anything. He just frowned. It wasn't even at him. It was just frowning that, I can't continue this. I can't continue this more difficult task for the sake of Allah. It's a noble thing. I can't continue the more difficult task for the sake of Allah. I have to go to the easier task, but I want to do the more difficult task. All right. All right, I'll come. Abasa wa tawalla. He frowned and turned. He shouldn't have even went to them and said, this is over. He shouldn't have gone to them and apologized. He should have immediately went to Abdullah ibn Maktoum. How did he know that the Prophet? How would he know the Prophet ﷺ said, "Okay, thank you for the time. I have to leave. I have another commitment." No, don't even do that. The way they're not willing. They don't want you. They don't even listen to you. Someone wants you, immediately go and don't frown again. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is his code of conduct. This is the bar for his ethics. Alayhi salatu wasalam. This is the bar. Don't frown. But he couldn't see. It doesn't matter. But I didn't do it because I didn't want to talk to him. It was more because I wanted to continue the more. It doesn't matter. No, I wanted to serve you more. It doesn't matter. You don't frown. Who taught you to frown? You don't frown. And don't turn. Abasa wa tawalla. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. This is one of the evidence of prophecy, this surah. Why would he recite this to people? In the midst of persecution and oppression and abuse, in the midst of all of this, he has to recite to people. Abasa wa tawalla. It's a surah that begins, it was one of the only two surahs that the name of the surah is a verb. All the other surahs, the name of the surah is a noun. Only two of them, Fussilat, and Fussilat could be seen as a noun as well because it'd be seen as a sifa mushabbaha, but that you don't care about that, so I won't bore you with it. But Abbas is the only one that's a true verb. The only surah that's called a true verb. He frowned. The surah is called He Frowned. That's what it's called. I don't know what they call it in the translations of the Quran. Whatever they call it the frown, it's wrong. The name of the surah is He Frowned. That's what it's called. Abasa, huwa, abasa. The fa'il, the subject is deleted, is understood by context. And جاءه الأعمى, when the blind man came to him, just to make sure that you understood that he was blind. Because if it wasn't in the Quran, you can say, well, maybe he wasn't blind. No, he was blind. The Quran says it. وَمَا يُدْرِيكَ لَعَلَّهُ يَزَّكَّى. What do you know? Maybe this person that is blind will be way better than all of them put together, and he was. Maybe he will have more influence and impact than all of these other people put together. أو يذكر فتنفعه الذكرى. And maybe he doesn't get better than them. He just learns something new. And that whatever you teach them or reminding him of will benefit him. It's more than enough. It's more than enough. From this we learn, by the way, from this scholars learn that if you spend all of your life trying to spread Islam, and in just one soul, you speak to 100 million, and one soul benefits from you, then you did something good. If one soul benefits from you for one moment, then you've done something good. And that's fine. If you're trying and if one person, if you can help one person. أو يذكر فتنفعه الذكرى, the blind man. How much can he offer, radiallahu anhu, to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, story at this time where they are weak and they are poor, a blind man who has no money. And the Quran came and said, no, you don't do that again. Abbas, don't frown. Sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. I can't understand this story. I don't understand. I don't. I've tried and I fail to comprehend it. I don't. I think the Prophet ﷺ, when he frowned, in my opinion, my book, that was something amazing. He wanted to do the more difficult thing. But what do I know? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, no, don't frown. Don't frown. He can't see it. It was for a good reason. I don't care. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Go to him immediately. Next time, immediately. You leave those who reject you and you go to him immediately and do not frown again. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. In the midst of persecution, understanding all of these circumstances. Like if you're on top and you make a mistake and we correct you, it's fine. But if you're struggling, you're at like a low time in your life, and we raise the ethical bar to that level, I mean, it's almost, that's my opinion. I'm wrong. That is my opinion. My opinion as a person, I'm like, cut him some slack. That's my opinion. He's awesome, alayhi salam. Very noble. Yeah, that's not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's opinion. Are you understanding? I think highly of this story. No, do not do it. To put me and everyone like me in their place. To put me and everyone like me in our places. That you don't understand the ethical code. This is the ethical code. You do not frown at a person who can't see you for a noble reason. You're not allowed to do that. Because frowning at people is just not acceptable. But he couldn't see it, but it was better. Doesn't matter. وما يدريك لعله يزكى أو يذكر فتنفعه الذكرى أما من استغنى. As for the people who reject you and don't want anything to do with you, فأنت له تصدى, you turn back to them again. وما عليك ألا يزكى. What will it harm you if they never listen to anything you say? وأما من جاءك يسعى, but the person who came towards you, وهو يخشى, and he had reverence in his heart of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فأنت عنه تلهى, you were distracted from him for a moment. No, كلا, never again. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He heard the verses. I can't imagine how he heard those verses from Jibreel. I always think about this. What went through his mind listening to those ayat? And then going that night and reciting them in the prayer so people could hear. I frowned. Shouldn't have frowned. Sallallahu alayka wa sallam ya sayyidi ya Rasulullah. But this is code of conduct. This is the ethical code this is the ethical code he lived by, alayhi salatu wasalam. This is the standard Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala held him to. Think about that. Because I know for a fact that we hold ourselves to much lower ethical standards, like way lower, like astronomically different in terms of what he held himself, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala held him to. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala held the Prophet alayhi salatu to that standard of ethics, of character. And we have to hold ourselves to something similar. And people, don't cut yourself slack when it comes to ethics and character. Don't give yourself excuses. Don't pat yourself on the back and make and validate and rationalize why it's okay for me to say like this at this moment, or why not to act not to be at my best behavior in this second. No, don't do that. Because if the Prophet ﷺ in this context was not allowed this one detail wasn't allowed to slide, I can't imagine what can slide. If that can't slide, if that detail can't slide, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that's the Prophet's code of conduct in the midst of the years of persecution. So think about that. Let's go a little bit and talk about the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, because radiallahu anhum, they had to persevere as well. This part of the Seerah Halaqah, I selectively choose the stories. So there's a lot of stories I will not share with you, because a lot of my audience are younger people, and some of the stories are extremely brutal. So as I share with you some of these stories, and if you find them to be brutal and find them to be a little bit difficult to hear, understand that behind them are stories that are way worse. And I'm selectively giving you these ones because I think hopefully people can stomach listening to them. But there are stories behind these ones that are much more difficult to tell, that you can go back to the books of Seerah to listen to. Because the Prophet ﷺ, because of his status, and because he was the leader, as the Prophet, and because of Abu Talib, they only went so far. And we'll talk about Abu Talib very soon. They only went so far in terms of how much they persecuted and oppressed and abused. But some of the Sahaba did not have that. Some of the Sahaba lacked that person who was defending them. So you want to see the true colors of the people of Quraysh. It showed with the way they treated the Sahaba. I think we'll get through maybe 2 or 3 stories today. So let's start with the one I love the most. The story of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. This is one of my favorite stories. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, an early Sahabi, one of the early people the Prophet ﷺ spoke to. And he met him on a journey with Abu Bakr to speak. They were going somewhere, I don't know exactly where, but they would come by a young man, or it was a teenager at the time during these stories, who was a shepherd. And he was a small kid, like as I say in Arabic, he was a short gentleman. He was not a big guy. He was a short guy. And they would ask him, can we give us isqina labanan, give us something to drink? So he refused. He said, these aren't mine, and I don't have permission, so I can't. So the Prophet ﷺ was impressed. So he pushed a little bit more to see if the kid would cave, and he didn't. He offered them money, he wouldn't do it. So he told him, if there are any of these sheep, the female sheep, not producing milk? So he said, yes, these are. He said, is it okay if I whatever milk I get out of this, the ones that aren't producing milk to drink? And he said, sure, because they're not. There's no accountability there. So the Prophet ﷺ went, وقرأ القرآن, and the sheep produced milk, and they drank. Abu Bakr. So Abdullah ibn Mas'ud watched. So he asked him, Man takun? Who exactly are you? You could see something. Who exactly are you? فقال أبو بكر هو رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. He is Rasulullah. So he asked a few more questions, and he accepted Islam within the 6th or 7th day of Islam. Within the 6th or 7th day of Islam, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud accepted. He'd be sitting with the Prophet, he was with the Prophet ﷺ all throughout his life. One of the great abadira of fiqh, one of the great leaders of Islamic knowledge, and some of the madhahib actually are originated in the teachings that he offered. He's sitting with the Prophet ﷺ with amongst the Sahaba, and because of the degree of persecution, their morale was low. There was just low morale in general, because the number of Muslims was not increasing at the same level when the persecution began, and they were so upset with how the Prophet ﷺ was being treated and how some of them were being treated. So one day ﷺ, he wanted to boost the morale a bit. فَقَالَ بَعْدَ أَنْ قَرَأَ عَلَيْهِمْ سُورَةَ الرَّحْمَنِ. And there's some discrepancy on this narration in terms of the surah, so if you find in another book it's a different surah, don't panic, it's just a discrepancy in terms of which surah we're talking about. This is the narration that I choose, or I find to be most likely. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals Surah Al-Rahman. So he recited it, alayhi salatu wasalam. Al-Rahman, allama al-Qur'an, khalaqa al-insana, allamahu al-bayan, al-shamsu wal-qamaru bi-husban, wal-najmu wal-shajaru yasjudan, wal-sama'a rafa'aha, ووضع الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان وأقيموا الوزن بالقسط ولا تخسروا الميزان. Beautiful verses. Surah Al-Rahman is just a beautiful one to listen to, regardless of the voice that you're hearing it through. So the Sahaba loved it. فقال, and this is a few days before. So one day he's sitting amongst the Sahaba, they're sitting around the Kaaba. And he said, Man yusmi'uhum al-Qur'an al-yawm? Who will make them hear the Qur'an today? Who's going to force people to hear a little bit of the new Qur'an? فقال ابن مسعود أنا يا رسول الله, I'll do it. فقال اجلس يا ابن مسعود. No, you can sit this one out. I'll bench you for this one, someone else. Because Ibn Mas'ud was very short and thin. It's a very, very small gentleman. So small that later on in Medina, the Prophet ﷺ would be sitting under a palm tree or a date tree, and he would say, can someone get us some dates? So Ibn Mas'ud, yeah, I'll do it. So he goes up the tree, And he, of course, if you know how, they're wearing athwab or qamsan. So the person who goes up the tree pulls up the qamis and he ties. Ever seen Saudi kids play soccer? I did this all my life as a kid. So he pulled them up and he goes up the thing. So now you could see his legs. So they were looking at his legs, and his legs were like really thin. So the Sahaba looked up and they, one Sahabi poked the other one and said, take a look. So they look up and they see the legs and they start giggling because he's just so small. So the Prophet ﷺ, now, men do this to one another, and it's not a big deal. But the Prophet ﷺ, he got upset. Yeah. As he rightfully would, because sometimes you're not sure if this person's going to be okay with the joke or not. He just got upset. فَقَالَ تَضْحَكُونَ وَاللَّهِ إِنَّ وَزْنَ قَدَمِهِ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ لَأَكْثَرَ مِنْ جَبَلِ أُحُدٍ. You're laughing at how small his legs are. Each one of them is heavier than Jabal Uhud in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the reason that this story exists is because, I believe that the reason he said that, alayhi salatu wasalam, because of this. Because Ibn Mas'ud, he said, I'll do it. And then the Prophet benched him. He asked again, Man yusmi'uhum al-yawm? No one wants to do that, because you go there and you read the Quran openly, and you're going to run into people who are going to. So he asked again, and no one really volunteered except Ibn Mas'ud. So the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, fine, go. فذهب ابن مسعود فوقف, he stood in front of the Kaaba. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان. They all gather up and they beat the lights out of him. Until Al-Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib pulls him out. They pull him out, he's unconscious. They take him, they take care of him. The next day, they're sitting, same thing, the dars. At the end of it, the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, من يسمعهم القرآن اليوم? Who will have them hear the Quran today? Ibn Mas'ud, all bandaged up, I'll do it. Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, no, you're fine. Like, you shouldn't have done it the first time. You're good to say. But he insisted. He kept on, no, I'll do it. So he goes again, same thing. Ar-Rahman, allama al-Quran, khalaqa al-insan. They all gather and they start beating him up, hitting him on his face, and he falls unconscious. Al-Abbas and Abu Dhar, they pull him out, and they take care of him. The third day, he's sitting there, he can barely recognize who he is. Who, man yusmi'uhum al-Quran al-yawm? Ibn Mas'ud, his hands up, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أبدا, never again. He will never do this again, period. It's not optional anymore. No, you're benched. You're not doing this. فقال ابن مسعود يا رسول الله دعني فوالله ما هانوا علي كما هانوا اليوم. Let me, I have no fear of them anymore. I've never been less fearful of them as I am today. Sometimes you have to, this is an issue of, it's a psychological issue. Whenever you're afraid of something, you're afraid of it until it happens. Then after it happens and you have to deal with it, you're not afraid of it anymore. Like, okay, khalas, it's happened. Whatever I was fearing, the actual pain, the consequences, the aftermath, all of that happened. I dealt with it. I'm not scared of them anymore. They can beat as much as they want. He still wasn't allowed to do it. But I always loved that word. ما هانوا علي كما هانوا اليوم. I've never been less afraid of them as much as I am today. I just don't care. They can wail at me as much as they want. رضي الله عنه وأرضاه. Once the Prophet ﷺ was standing in front of the Kaaba, and this is an issue. This is actually a story of his persecution, but I tell it here because it's somewhere in the middle. He finished his prayer and he's standing there in front of the Kaaba, just looking at it. And 7 to 8 young men from Quraysh come, and they start. You've seen bullies before. They're a bunch of bullies. So they came and they kind of walked by him and maybe gave him a couple of shoulders here and there, kind of shouldering him from the back, shouldering him on the side. Alayhi salatu wasalam stands, doesn't say a word. They surround him. They start pushing him around, alayhi salatu wasalam. And he's talking to them, this is not appropriate. You're all, and they're doing this, and he's trying, and he doesn't want to get this. He refuses to be physical, alayhi salatu wasalam, with them. But they're pushing him around. They're saying things. They're gathering around, trying to physically make it a little bit worse. You know who tells us the story? Anyone know who tells us the story? Imam Ali. Imam Ali, he tells us the story. He's the one who told us this story. We know it from him. You know why we know this story? Because his son asked him one day, Man ashja'un nasi, ya abati? Who is the most brave of people? So immediately he answers, Qala Abu Bakr. Radiyallahu. He has a lot of beautiful traits, radiyallahu anhu. That's not the first one that comes to my mind. Like when I talk about Abu Bakr, and it's beautiful to talk about him, and he has a lot of beautiful attributes, it's not the first one that comes to my mind. It isn't. But Ali radiallahu anhu, he was asked the question. Now his son was hoping that he would say me. Right? Hassan is asking his father, hoping his father would say, oh, it's myself. Because radiallahu anhu, Ali was known for his bravery. He is known for his courage, alayhi salam, for sure. So he answers, Abu Bakr, immediately. فقال كيف? How? Explain, I've never heard that before. So he tells this story. Because he was young, he was 10 years old, or 11 years old at this time, or 13. He was a kid. So he watched the Prophet ﷺ with men. And he wanted to get up, and the Prophet ﷺ said, no, don't move. It's not your thing. They're pushing him around, he stands there. Abu Bakr, by coincidence, coming by, he sees this. He loses it. So he comes and he starts pushing them around. He's saying, تَقْتُلُونَ رَجُلًا أَن يَقُولَ رَبِّيَ اللَّهِ. He uses the verse from Surah Ghafir that was revealed recently. أَتَقْتُلُونَ رَجُلًا أَن يَقُولَ رَبِّيَ اللَّهِ وَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ مِنْ رَبِّكُمْ. He starts reciting the verse to them. You're going to harm and kill and mistreat a person because he is saying, Rabbi Allah, my Lord is Allah, and he's bringing you clarifications from your Lord. دعوه يقول ما شاء. Let him say what he's not harming you. So they move their, that's bullies, that's how bullies are. They move their interest from the Prophet ﷺ to Abu Bakr. When they start beating him, and the Prophet ﷺ tries to pull him out, and they push him away, and it becomes a big kerfuffle, and people get involved. They beat Abu Bakr to the point where the narration that Sayyidina Ali tells us, قال حتى استوى خده وأنفه. Until his cheek and his nose were at the same level. He was so edematous, he was so bruised that his nose and his face were all at the same level, just a big puff. And they pulled him out unconscious. And they took him to the house of his daughter and his mother to be taken care of. And the Prophet ﷺ went with him and then left him for the night and went home. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu would wake up in the middle of the night. He would wake up from his, he probably had a concussion radiallahu anhu that night. Woke up after being out of it for a bit. He wakes up, his family are happy. Everyone is glad that he's awake. He wakes up, قال ما فعل برسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. What happened to the Prophet? فقالوا هو بخير. He's fine. ولكن أنت, but if you, and they start, the daughter and the mother start saying, but what did you do? Look at your face, and look at your hands, and look at your feet, and look at your legs, and look at your thawb, and it's all. He would say, والله لا أجلس مكاني حتى أراه بعيني. I will not stay here until I see him with my own eyes. He was scared that maybe they were telling him he's fine, just to calm him down because he was injured. فقال لا والله حتى أراه بعيني. فقالوا كيف وأنت لا تستطيع أن تقوم. How? And you can't get up. You can't move, and he couldn't move. فقال تحملانني. The two of you will carry me. Speaking to his mother and his daughter. You will carry me, and you one hand on one shoulder and the other on the other. And that's what they did. قال فحملتاه إلى رسول الله عليه الصلاة والسلام. They would take him to the Prophet عليه الصلاة. They knock on the door. The Prophet عليه الصلاة would open the door. What gets to me is their friendship. That's the piece I can never get over. It's the friendship. It's just when you study it a little bit and you really understand it, it's just this friendship. Friendship to me is beautiful. I don't know why. I love it. I love the friendship that they had. They just loved each other. Like both of them. He saw him عليه الصلاة والسلام. He breaks down in tears. He hugs Abu Bakr. قال ما جاء بك? Why are you here? قال أراك بعيني يا رسول الله. I need to see you that you were okay. فقال وفيك ما فيك, and you have all this. فقال ما بي إلا شيء في وجهي. Just a couple of things in my face. You couldn't see his face. There was no eyes. There was nothing to. You couldn't see it. He was all. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. They loved him that way. That's how they loved him. See, this is the point of this story. This is why I tell you this story. Is because that's how they loved him. Now, you can't love someone like that. You can't observe people loving someone like that and not at least be a little bit interested to ask, well, why? Why would they love him like that? What did he do exactly? What did he do? Cast a spell? What did he do to them? What did he do that would deserve this degree of devotion? When you think about it, he wasn't wealthy, alayhi salatu wasalam. He didn't give them money. It wasn't bribery. It wasn't a promise of status. It was just something about his character, alayhi salatu. It was just an issue of genuineness. Like some people will suck up to great army generals and political leaders and kings and stuff like that. But alayhi salatu wasalam was being persecuted just as hard as they were. He didn't have any of these things. Why they loved him like that, alayhi salatu wasalam, is not beyond us, but it's important to think about. Because if you understand it, then you're able to appreciate a little bit more about who he was and his character, alayhi salatu wasalam. And that piece, if you can appreciate that piece, you can understand why it was that they loved him, and you can find a certain aspect of that in your own heart. It's a deal break. It's a deal changer. It's a life changer. Honestly, it is. Like it can shift the needle for you in your life if you learn to love him, alayhi salatu wasalam, and those around him. his wife and his children and the people who followed him, if you can learn to do that peace genuinely, like actually love them, it actually it does things for people. It really does, because love is so powerful. It's just very, very powerful. In this whole story, there's nothing more powerful than love. This story that I'm telling you is a story of love, of someone who learned about Allah and loved Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And because he loved Allah and loved the word of Allah and loved the way of life, he's taught that to people who followed him, who loved him for it and loved Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it, loved each other for it. And they love it. As Muslims, we have pieces of that still left. You know, if you look at it, whenever a new person accepts Islam, right? The whole community gathers, and people are extremely happy and they're tearful because we all, even though we're not following it amazingly, even though we are not adhering to this perfectly, we know that it's beautiful and that it's amazing and that it's profound and that it is real. And if someone can see the beauty in it and accept it, it's just it's a joyful moment for all of us. Where it's joyous that someone else got to see the light. Alhamdulillah. Yeah, I'm not doing very well with the light, but someone else got to see it because we love it. We still have aspects of that left. It's not dead yet, but it's far from where it even needs to be. It's far from remotely. It's not even close to where it needs to be. Because that's how Abu Bakr loved the Prophet ﷺ. That's how the Sahaba, that's how Ibn Mas'ud loved the Prophet ﷺ. They're willing to give their lives because they believed in the message. They believed in the narrative. They believed in this way. This way they could see the reality of it. I think you have one more. You know Bilal's story, don't you? Who doesn't? Who doesn't know the story of Bilal? Bilal ibn Rabah al-Habashi. Beautiful, beautiful man. Taken from his home in Abyssinia, in Habasha. Stolen with his brother from his parents. His mother would find her way across the Red Sea and reunite with him and his brother later on. These are aspects of his story that maybe you don't know. His brother Khalid was younger than him. He carried his brother all his life. Bilal, everything you see him doing in the background, he's taking care of his mother and he's taking care of his younger brother. In some narrations point out his sister in the story, but I could never validate that piece, so I don't know. As a slave, as an enslaved gentleman, he would accept Islam. The Prophet ﷺ would offer it to him. Abu Bakr would offer it to him. And the Prophet ﷺ would ask Abu Bakr to speak to him because of certain qualities the Prophet ﷺ appreciated in Bilal early on. So Bilal would be one of the earliest Muslims that we know of. One of the earliest Muslims that we know of. And he was enslaved by a man named Umayyah ibn Khalaf. And Umayyah was one of the great leaders of Quraysh, one of the people the Prophet ﷺ, the story of Abasa, was probably talking to that day. And Umayyah could not fathom or accept that one of his slaves was following the Prophet ﷺ. So he unleashed all of this hate and all this savagery upon this young gentleman. And they would take him outside of Mecca to a place where there was no trees and nothing to stop the scorching sun. And they would tie him down and they would bring a boulder and they would put it on his chest so it would be hard for him to breathe. So he would be lying there just trying to the best of his ability just to take breath so he doesn't die. Because you can only breathe if you have the capacity to move your chest in and out. So with a large rock it's impossible. So they do that and then they would lash him and they would say, قُلْ هُبَلْ نُخْرِجْكَ. Just say the word hubal and we let you go. This is what he would say. لِسَانِي لَا يُحْسِنُهُ. My tongue can't say it. I am not from this land. See, Bilal was from Abyssinia, so he learned Arabic as a second language. So he would mock them and say, sorry, I have an accent, I can't say the word. But I can't say another word. Huh? How about ahadun ahad? Does that work for you? I can say that one. I know how to say that one. Ahadun ahad. It became an anthem. It became the anthem. You know, he coined it. He coined it as a phrase. It was on a banner during the battles. On the banner of the Battle of Badr. Ahadun ahad. Because Bilal said it under the rock. Because under the rock, Bilal screamed it out and refused to say hubal. Even though the Prophet ﷺ told him, say whatever they want you to say. Say what, it doesn't matter because you don't mean it. Say it, you can say it. The rukhsas in the Quran. The rukhsa of when you're being, إِلَّا مَنْ أُكْرِهَ وَقَلْبُهُ مُطْمَئِنٌ بِالْإِيمَانِ. Except those, Allah will punish those who say things that are obscene, or except those who are forced, coerced, and their hearts are filled with iman. They have an exception. He refused to take the exception. He did not want to be exempted from this. So he say, قُلْ هبل فيقول لساني لا يحسنه لكن لساني يحسن أحد أحد. I can say أحد أحد. I don't know how to say this other word that you're telling me about. أحد أحد. And they hated the word. And they couldn't, and he was under the rock, right? People surrounding him, but he was stronger. See, this is the piece that you have to learn from this story. Yes, they outnumbered him, and yes, they persecuted him. Yes, they tortured him, but he was stronger because he believed in what he was saying, and he stood by what he believed, and he was not. And that strength, he had the upper hand, radiallahu anhu, at the time. They didn't know it, but he did. Do I have time? I don't have time, eh? Okay. So next time I'll continue the story of Bilal because there's a few more pieces that I want to share with you, inshallah. I hope that was a benefit to you. Tomorrow, I'm forgetting to say this. Every Sunday morning we have a breakfast. It is community based, so you need to bring some food with you so that we can eat. We give a short dars after Salat al-Fajr, and then we all have breakfast together, men in this side and the ladies on that side. It's very nice, actually. It's picked up quite nicely. So I invite everyone to come and join us. Get Salat al-Fajr on a Sunday. Please don't come empty-handed. Bring something with you, preferably something you made at home, so we can, people can enjoy the different dishes and it becomes more of a community feel.